Hello everybody and welcome to another Crumb Bum Deluxe soiree. I'm happy to have you. Thank you all for the views and commentary and keeping up. I really appreciate it. I always like to think if you found yourself here, then you're in the right place. I don't use any SEO hashtags or anything like that. So if you found me, then we're most likely of a like mind, and I really like that. Today I just wanted to jump on and actually wanted to recommend a few books by a particular author that I think you might like if you enjoyed Disclosure Day. Now, if you saw my video, you know that I didn't really enjoy Disclosure Day, but it did have a lot of the stuff that I tend to usually enjoy in my alien cinema or, you know, alien lore, UFO, hobbyist, ufologist kind of thing going on up here. But yeah, so there's a writer, his name is Whitley Streiber, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, and he wrote a book in the 80s called Communion. You may have seen this cover staring back at you from bookshelves at some point in your life and been wholly terrified by the imagery of that alien on the cover. And you know, Whitley Streiber, this book in particular came out at a time, I think, when E.T. had been out. Spielberg's notion of extraterrestrials, I think, is one that we all hope is true, that they're benevolent, that they're meaning well for humanity as, you know, we evolve into the ability to, you know, kind of level up with them, I guess, or get to a point of evolution where anyway, there's all these theories about, you know, what could happen. And I know Spielberg lies in one camp where it's a lot more benevolent type of aliens. And so anyway, this book came out. Whitley Streiber released Communion, and it's, like he says here, a true story in his mind about his own abduction by what we know now as the Greys. And when this book came out, I would gather to say that Greys and stuff were already kind of out, maybe in popular fiction, or at least in the subtext of science fiction writing. But at the time when this book blew up, it really brought this image of the almond-eyed shaped Grey to our attention. And the book itself is, in my opinion, probably one of the scariest books I've ever read. And, you know, if it is true, if you believe that it's true, then it's doubly scarier. Whitley posits that the extraterrestrials that he encountered in this book are not benevolent, but they're also not strictly evil in any sense. The notion he puts across in this book is that these extraterrestrials see us like ants or like deer, you know, when you tag a deer in the forest and let it run off. To them, there's no understanding of violation the way that humans or maybe other animals, mammals, or any other animal might feel violated, being held down, controlled, experimented on, X, Y, and Z. So Whitley posits that he was not only abducted, but that he was experimented on, and he also posits that because of the aspect of violation to his own body, that he was SA'd by extraterrestrials. And that's something he's become ridiculed by, or at least was for a time during his career as he was selling this novel and doing book tours and everything. But, you know, whether you believe it or not is a whole other discussion. But if you haven't read this book yet and you really liked Disclosure Day and happen to want it to be a little scarier, if that's what you were looking for, that's kind of what I'm looking for with my alien stuff. I don't necessarily want them to be evil, but you know, I think there's things we're always not going to be able to understand. So that makes the uncertainty and the unknown of it makes it somewhat disturbing or chilling. You know, just the idea is, even if they are benevolent, you know, aliens popping out of a ship, first time people are going to be like, "What the F?" You know. So anyway, this book popped up on the scene in the 80s. I think 89 it came out, and it kind of gave people a different idea of what we could possibly expect, or actually not even that, but what is out there already. And so I really like this writer. This book really scared the shit out of me when I read it the first time. I highly recommend this as a starter. However, the books that I'm recommending today, there's 3 others. This was just context for where this guy started or how he got put on the map. But the other book I would recommend, if you liked Disclosure Day, or if you like this type of UFO entertainment content and you're a reader, then I definitely think you should check out Majestic by the same author, Whitley Streiber. So this book it uses fictional characters to have like a speculative, beat by beat, play by play examination of the Roswell crash, the discovery of the craft, the initial reports that they had found one, and then later the cover up. And so it's a really cool book that uses, that are connected to the Majestic 12. You may have heard that before. That this book takes, what seems like actual figures involved and fictionalizes the names, but still gives you this really like tense play-by-play of how things maybe went down. But Whitley also uses the actual news clippings and documentation that was involved with the Roswell crash. That the book itself feels realistic. It feels like you are right there when they find that UFO after it crashes. And, the books near the ending tend to have his own kind of take on it, much like Spielberg. Whitley Streiber is, I think, a little bit more aware that, there's things about whether or not they're benevolent or not. There's things about these craft and there's things about these extraterrestrials that we may never really understand. And so there's a slight ambiguity to the way, he tends to wrap up the stories. I don't want that to dissuade you, because I think they're really interesting. And, that's the Majestic itself is a great one if you've ever been fascinated by the Roswell crash. I believe Whitley Streiber does a good job of maintaining what the so-called facts are as far as the reports and documentation. So I think as his story unfolds, you really get a sense of it could possibly have unfolded that way. Potentially. So Majestic's a great book. Highly recommend this. Definitely if you're into the Roswell crash and the history of that place and everything like that. There's a lot going on in this book, and I think it's a really good read. So the next book is going to be The Greys. Okay, now this book in particular, really good book, by the way. But if you see down here, it says soon to be a major motion picture. This never happened. This movie never came out. However, as I was watching Disclosure Day, I realized that a lot of what's in this book is in Disclosure Day. But I will say, this book, the story in this book, the way the events unfold, the characters themselves, the way Whitley writes, 10 out of 10 times better than Disclosure Day. This is what I expected Disclosure Day to be. But what we got pales in comparison to this particular story, this novel, and his examination of more of this lore, which I think he was largely responsible for in a lot of his books, and proliferated on the internet over time. But I'll just read you the synopsis to this book, and we'll see how much it parallels Disclosure Day. So the plot synopsis I got off of Claude for this one is: a trio of Greys called the Three Thieves has been quietly working in a small Kentucky town, preparing a boy named Connor Callahan across generations for some larger purpose he doesn't understand. A government colonel works to keep the Greys secret, while an empath named Lauren Glass is the only person able to communicate with a captive Grey known as B, for Bob. When that captive escapes a secure facility, it triggers a race between the government and the aliens, with the fate of humanity tied to Lauren's ability to understand them. So, when I read that, I think that it kind of loosely is similar to what we saw in Disclosure Day. This character, Lauren Glass, in the book, who's an empath, is in tune with the alien, and she's a part of this story that's trying to find an understanding there, much like I think Disclosure Day was attempting to do. The character Connor Callahan, it's basically the same thing, honestly. These two characters end up meeting each other and seeing that they're both part of a greater purpose that has to do with extraterrestrials coming to Earth. And, in this book as well, you have this general character who's much like the analog for the Wardex Colin Firth character, who's trying to keep the thing all under wraps and trying to go at every turn to make sure that these people don't reveal what they know. And I forget how the book ends exactly. I think it's also a little abstract, a little cryptic. But I remember in Disclosure Day, the moment where the little kids, when they're being abducted, they hold hands while the aliens are experimenting on them. All from this book. That is from this book. And in fact, it's better the way they set all that up. The abduction of the kids. You get that stuff. I feel like Disclosure Day should have opened with their abductions, or I really just feel like Spielberg should have adapted this book because it would have been great. But for whatever reason, it fell to the wayside and never got made. So there's The Greys. Check it out for yourself. It's a really good book, really good story. They're all kind of thrillers, so they're all really exciting. But the third novel I want to recommend to you is Hybrids by Whitley Streiber as well. Hybrids is awesome. This is it's rooted in a lot of this ufologist conspiracy theory stuff about, especially about genetic engineering, extraterrestrials creating hybrids that are both human and alien. In this book in particular, you have a scientist who has been creating these hybrids and under a black budget, secret classified, top secret laboratories in a New Mexico base underground, very reminiscent of Dulce Base in New Mexico. If you're not aware of that conspiracy theory, definitely check that on YouTube. Dulce Base is really interesting, even if it is just lore, internet fiction. But Hybrids is really awesome. It functions kind of like a nonstop kind of action roller coaster ride from the beginning all the way till the end. So it's very much an action movie in a novel form, which I think would make if somebody could really adapt this book, it would be quite good. The hybrids in the book themselves. So basically you have the scientist who is making hybrids, and the thing about the hybrids is they're biomechanical. It's such advanced technology that their bodies look and feel like flesh, but it's all also advanced machinery. But the hybrids in this book are terrifying. They seem to exhibit qualities of humans, but they also seem to be able to bypass, compassion, empathy, and these things, because they kind of have this mind as we assume AI will have eventually, where it's just going to find ways to take us over and see that we're obsolete, we're no longer necessary. So the hybrids function like that, and not only do there's some weird shit in this book. There's some crazy shit in this book that the hybrids end up doing. Your main characters are a guy named Mark Bryan and a love interest of his who's in the book. And I don't want to spoil anything, but he is connected to the hybrids. He's connected to this scientist. What's interesting, too, is the scientist, he was ordered in the book to destroy the hybrids by the government. They deemed it too dangerous because if the hybrids ever got out, they would not only outpace us in every possible way, but they would be able to procreate faster. They'd be able to procreate with humans and use them as incubators, basically. But essentially, because of the way that their minds work and the way that they calculate against humanity, it's a no-brainer for them to wipe us out. So what ends up happening is your character, Mark Bryan, this is the only spoiler I'll give you, he finds out that he's also a hybrid, but he's been genetically modified to be more human than extraterrestrial. So he kind of becomes a superhero, more or less, and he's the only one who can take these hybrids on. And there's some excellent scenes. There's some terrifying scenes with these hybrids. There's some great action in it and some really incredible visuals. This one leans a little bit more, fiction, thriller, but it's still loosely connected to Whitley Streiber's lore. And, if you go back to Communion and you examine how you felt about that, assuming that he's telling the truth about it, then you see some of these other books that he's just deemed fiction. But sometimes I wonder if he just calls them fiction. And at this point, a lot of what he does is speculative, especially in this book. It does feel like something that was kind of imagined. But I think all these things connect. It's fun in games when you're reading the novels. It's fun in games anyway, the ufology stuff. But now that we're in an age where we're approaching some kind of disclosure and the government is starting to be less tight-lipped about unidentified aerial phenomenon and such, I think, for my money anyway, these type of books are really engaging, and anything that captures my imagination in this way, because I think what's good about these works in particular is that they capture imagination. So whatever it is you feel about extraterrestrials, UFOs, whatever it may be, you know, I think there's something in the subtext of all these stories that is resonating with us as humans, obviously, because I think we're starting to get to a point where we ourselves, outside of what the government is saying, we ourselves are starting to realize, like, why wouldn't there be any other life in space? You know, I doubt we're so special, especially with things like the James Webb Telescope and how much farther we're getting out to space, and how much more we're discovering about space, and how mysterious it all still is. There's just plenty to chew on with all that, and it's one of my favorite hobbies, being kind of a UFO guy. And again, I highly recommend these novels. I think if you're at all a fan of this kind of thing, you're going to really enjoy those. Especially if you liked Disclosure Day, if you're really into it, I highly recommend these as well, because I think it might broaden the horizons of what's possible, at least in the fiction aspect, at least in the writing. And that's the other thing to say. My biggest problem with Disclosure Day was the script. So if you're into some better writing, sorry to say, check out Whitley Streiber's books. Some of his other books he deems nonfiction that are more related to communion. So those might be a little too out there or new agey for a lot of people, but the books I've recommended in this episode are, you know, they read like thrillers, and they're really fun. So that's my piece today. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back with some more movie reviews, and, you know, who knows else what I have planned up here besides me. I don't even know half the time. So anyway, I will check you later. We'll see you soon.